Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Zanotti, and I'm joined today by Dr. Susan Nash, and this is Life Edge, because, life just doesn't have to be mediocre. Hi, Susan.
Hey there. Hey there. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to introduce our guest, Chris Gordon, Sandridge Energy.
And here we go. We'll be right back to Chris. And we are back. Hi, Chris. How are you today?
Great, Rick. How are you doing?
Doing great, and so glad you could join us.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about what you do with Sandridge Energy.
Sure. My title is Learning Consultant. Typically, when I tell people that, they kind of have a confused look on their face. So really, anything that plugs in goes to IT. If it'll hurt you, that goes to safety. Anything else falls to me. And so I'm our only person fully dedicated to the continuing development of our employees, both professionally and personally. So I achieved that through interpreting behavioral assessments, coaching managers, employees, meeting with teams, facilitating classes, finding outside resources to teach classes.
That's really cool. So some people may not know anything about Sandridge Energy or where they are. So they're in Oklahoma City. So I'll let you tell the rest of the story.
Okay, well, you just about got it all. We're in downtown Oklahoma City. We were formed in 2006. We are a exploration and production company focused on the Mid-Continent region in northern Oklahoma and southern Kansas.
Yeah, you guys do some really cool things, and you have team members everywhere. You've got engineers and geologists and accountants, and in my opinion, every single group speaks a different language, and they think that they speak the same language, and they don't. So what do you do about that when they're...
Yeah, sure. So we're all kind of educated in our own area with our own lingo, and so when we come into the workplace and use what we've been educated to do or say, there's disconnect. And so we've just been scripted, it seems like, through our education to have these opportunities for missing each other when we think that we should be that the communication should be clear, but oftentimes it's not.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that, especially in the oil industry, and there can be some tremendous mistakes because, for example, I mean, you think the engineers and geologists would totally understand the same things. They're working in the same teams. They're looking at the same well logs, the same information. But then they supposedly want the same thing, but their way to get from point A to B is completely different. And then you always hear engineers talking about how geologists are imprecise and they're touchy-feely, et cetera. And then engineers, like, all they care about is the equipment. Do you see that at all? Or?
Sure. I don't know that I've met too many touchy-feely geologists, but what I think that they're talking about are how the geologists tend to be more abstract in the way they view ideas and opportunities, where an engineer is going to be more black and white by the book. We do it this way because that's what the book says to do. And so there's a disconnect between the two and helping them understand that there's a disconnect first and then finding ways to work through it.
So Susan, what you're saying is that there's a rocky relationship between geologists and engineers? Is that what it is?
That's good. That's good. I always, when I would introduce Susan, she's come to teach some classes. I would mention her and say, something about geology, and she's a rock star, and the geologists get it, and then everybody else has no clue what I'm talking about.
So, it makes me want to run away.
No. Good stuff.
It's pretty interesting. Yeah, it's pretty interesting because, for example, an engineer will look at, say, a reservoir that's a sand body, and they'll say, okay, well, I see the sand. I've mapped it out. I've got this diagram, and it's three-dimensional, and this is what it is. But the geologist will go, oh no, that's a point bar, and if that's the case, it's fining upward or coarsening upward. No, it's a turbidite, it's a lobe. So there's multiple interpretive possibilities, and I've never met a geologist who likes just having 3 or 4. They want to have at least 5 or 6 interpretations, and and they're hardwired to like disagree or propose it. Once you propose one interpretation, they're hardwired to like propose another possibility, and that drives engineers completely crazy.
Yes, absolutely. I'm thinking back to some of the things I've heard from geologists, and my favorite is when you give them data and say, what does it say? Their response is, what do you want it to say? Just because there's so many ways that it can be interpreted. And that does create tension inside, I think, a typical engineer's mind, because for them, things are black and things are white. There's very little gray area, and a geologist, I mean, they live in the gray. It could be this, it could be that. It could be 5 other potential things. What do you want it to be? And I really got a kick out of that response.
Yeah, and it becomes challenging when you've got to understand what's been going on in the depositional environment. If you want to go into an existing field and say, do wells between the wells to try to get what's left behind, you have to sort of have a story and an explanation for it. And what the engineer usually wants to do is gather more data, whereas the geologist wants to go out into the field and find the analogs in the outcrop. So,
Yes, no, for sure. I totally agree. And, one thing, working with even senior managers who are geologists and engineers, the funny thing about it is they don't really get much better at communicating at higher levels as they do at lower levels. I had one engineer, we were talking about it, and the geologist will come in and say, this is all the information we need, and he's ready to go and put together a plan to drill. The engineer is looking for several more pieces of information before he's comfortable making that same decision. Now, will he make it? Potentially, yes, but the geologists tend to be more ready to do it earlier.
that's really cool. So
Yeah.
you've developed a training program to help people get through that, and I think it would fit. It works for other industries as well, but you had a chance to teach a class that based on that when you were in Denver at the annual convention for the American Association of Petroleum Geologists. And I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about it. Rick, what do you think?
Sounds good.
Sorry. I feel bad. I mean, like, oh, I'm so excited about this. I'm like, not letting you talk, Rick.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so the class in May at the AAPG annual conference was all about trying to help geologists understand and communicate with engineers. Now, when I say that communicate with engineers, I mean a typical engineer. Now, there are some atypical engineers, just like there's some atypical geologists, but traditionally there is that gap, and helping them understand it and bridge it. I truly think it's easier in the mind of a geologist to bridge it down to an engineer's level than it might be the other way around, just because the geologist is so abstract. To think about conceptualizing what a 3D reservoir looks like thousands of feet under the earth, and then communicating that to the engineering teams that will go and get it, I think it's easier to work your way down to their level than it is to try to bring them up. Maybe you can meet somewhere near the middle, but I still think the geologists will end up going a little further, because I think it just would be a little easier for them to.
Well, I have a question. Okay,
Sure.
so would your approach work for people going to Mars on SpaceX, populating?
So the assessment we use, I think people going to Mars on SpaceX, I watched that episode, a little bit of it. Yeah, it'd be helpful. Anytime you have 2 people who are different, it's helpful to know what those differences are. So my wife and I, we both grew up in Oklahoma City, both actually on 19th Street. We went to the same middle school, the same high school. We went to graduate school at the same school. But yeah, we have different definitions for very common words. And so having a tool like the one that I use for this, called the style of influence, helps us to understand and see those differences, just that they're different, and that's all that it means. It's not a good, it's not bad, it's different, and understanding and accepting that. At our house, the word almost has 2 very different definitions. There's my definition, meaning, say if you ask me in the morning, Chris, are you almost ready? I will say, yes, I am almost ready if I am on step 7 of 10 in the readying process. So I have to put on my shoes, grab my phone, keys, wallet, something like that, ready to go. The lovely Mrs. Gordon, if I ask her, hey, honey, are you almost ready? She will say yes if she's at least on step number 1. So
well, this is sort of like the men are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of idea, where it's not that any one side is wrong, they're different. And they're very different. Like for example, with your analogy, I would say never ask a woman, "Are you ready?" Let me know when you're ready.
That's good. So absolutely, what happened with this particular time is we were carpooling at the time, and so I went and she said she was almost ready, and I used my understanding of almost. Went and got in the car and was sitting in it and sitting in it and sitting in it, and after a little while, I thought maybe she forgot that I was in the car, and so I would just remind her, hey, I'm already out here with a little toot of the horn, and I learned real quickly that that's what you shouldn't do. So yeah, it ended up, but what I learned from that is I no longer ask her if she's ready. I go in and take a peek and say, hey honey, love you, and then I can see instantly where she's ready. So I've not foregone my need to know where she is in the readying process, but I've changed my approach so that way there's taking out the opportunity for miscommunication is ultimately what we do, or try to do.
You agree with that, Susan?
That's a great example. I like it a lot. I think that the problem with that, though, is that you have to have a lot of time and you have to have like this observational ability. So what you're doing is like this scientific investigation or checking. And what if you don't have the time to like ground truth it? And you have to like understand her interpretation of where she is by her words.
Sure. So, well, then it's trying to figure it out. I mean, there are probably some opportunities where you, like you say, you don't have time. That's where this style of influence assessment, I believe, comes in helpful, because I can look at that and say whether someone is going to be an abstract communicator or concrete. Are they listening for details, or are they listening for the like connecting in the relationship? I mean, going through it, it's fantastic. It's a really fun assessment to go through, and so there we can cut out a lot of the time trying to understand that. And so looking at the style of influence, it helps me just regularly with Morgan when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Now, how does that help you in the actual training part? In other words, when you're either developing training or implementing a training strategy, how do you bridge all the different communication types? And you're right, when you deal with engineers, IT, scientists, they're all difficult in different ways.
Sure. So one of the things that I think a lot of facilitators don't do great at is trying to understand their audience. And so with a tool like the style of influence, I'm able to look at everyone who's going to be in the class. Now, this is if, I have the information. If I don't have it, well, then I go about it a little different way. But if it's a group of engineers, I know the presentation is going to be very different than if it's a group of geologists, or if it's a group of human resource people, just by natural tendencies. Not that everyone fits into these boxes by any means, but generally it makes it a lot easier to know who you're going to be speaking to and how to communicate to them.
That's interesting. I've had friends who were in the car business, and they would sell cars, and the people they abhorred the most were either the engineers or some of the scientific types, because they want to see the engine, they want to look at every connection, they want to know, and they ask incessant questions about every minute detail of that car, to the point of, do you really want to be a car engineer? And it's interesting. And for a sales guy, that's the worst kind of person, because they don't want to deal with that. They just want to go right to the sale. Do you like it? Can we? They're trying to do a sale on an emotional level, and the engineer goes, I don't have any emotions. I want to look at this from an architectural point of view. How's it structured? How's it built?
So absolutely it would be helpful for car salesmen. Now, I don't encourage them to get it, because I occasionally have to buy cars, and so if they knew exactly how to sell to me, that would probably not be the best thing for me. But no, if you know that this person, so one of the things that comes out of the style of influence is there's a relational scale. The higher value, we're the ones, I'm a 99, as high as you can get. Absolutely buy either based on relationship or how it makes me feel.
Okay.
Right. So I buy the car because I sit in it and I feel good, or I feel good about the brand, right? Maybe there's some social responsibility that the dealership or the company is offering, something like that. Where the other end of it, the lower end of the spectrum, is where a lot of your engineers and even some accounting type folks tend to be sometimes. And so they're much more about the specifications of the engine. They know the cubic feet of the trunk and the inside of the cabin and 0 to 60, all that kind of stuff. The upper value of that would say, how does it make me feel?
Okay. Now, it's funny, you bring that up, and my wife and I, when we first got married, went to a Nissan dealership, and we were looking at a Nissan 300ZX. And
very cool.
She says,
nice.
And she said, I'm driving it first. And I responded, no, I'm driving it first so I can learn how to use it and show you how to use it right. No,
use it right.
I'm driving it first.
The key word there is use it right.
We had this whole argument about who's driving it first, and the guy's just watching us. And all of a sudden he goes, why don't you buy 2 of them? Fine, we'll get 2. And we actually got 2. And it was one of the stupidest things we've ever done. And at the moment it sounded great because that way I drive mine, she drives hers, and it didn't matter. And we left the dealership going, do you realize what we just did? How stupid that was? And the guy's probably going, do you realize how stupid those 2 were?
Yeah.
but it worked. He got a sale for 2 cars when we were looking for 1. And I just kept thinking that was the absolute dumbest thing. Of course, they weren't even cars that were functional. We had 2-seaters, 2-seaters. So we had no functionality for about 3 years. And
I love it.
It was
that
dumb.
is awesome.
And the guy was just going, and he just recommended, I think half jokingly, and we went with it.
That's what we get, kind of little frustration there. Yeah, I'm going to get my own. You can get your own too.
And we both wanted it, so it was one of those. Oh, that was really dumb. And we never did that again. But that one time was just, I can't believe we did that. But it's a perfect example of your methodology, because if we had really paid attention more to the way we were communicating, the way he was communicating with us, we would have said, no, we're fine. Okay, you drive it first or whatever. And we would have just figured it out. But we were both resisting. And then the car dealership, really, the guy was smart. He didn't go with the resistance. He just made a dumb little comment about you buy 2.
Right.
And being both IT people, we both went, okay, fine. That solves the problem.
Sure.
It created another problem, but it solved that instant problem. That was really childish. But anyway.
I love it, though. I love the story. But so I have no idea how. Okay, maybe Chris, you can diagnose me based on my car buying experience. Okay. Okay, so.
Okay, we're all bracing over here.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Maybe she's a candidate to go to Mars.
Well, I tend to be the type of person who goes in and it's like, I don't want to beat around the bush. I just want to buy something.
Yeah.
So I do it. But I've decided that after 2 or 3 sort of bad experiences, that was not the way to do it. So the last 2 cars, I did a lot of research online and went around and shopped around and then decided, okay, in this case, okay, Honda Accord. But the first before that was a Subaru, really liked it. But then, so I got the special deal online, found out what the prices were, the Blue Book, whatever. I went to the, and then I contacted them through email and negotiated their cheapest price. It was like, it looked really good. And then I came in, I said, and I was ready. I was ready to close the deal. So I got us a great deal on a beautiful Honda Accord, like latest model, top of the line. But I just bought it. I didn't even get in the car and drive it. And my dad goes, you didn't even want to drive it? Oh, and then he goes, you can't negotiate a car like that. So he went down to see what they would sell it to him and he was going to protect me from myself. They quoted him their best deal was like $4,000 more than they quoted me. And I also decided that I wanted to be within 3 miles of my home. So if I had problems, I could go to the dealership.
Okay.
And so I did. I just went in and bought it, and then I felt kind of bad that the salesman wasn't getting much of a commission because I knew how much I was doing. So I went ahead and got financing.
Oh, that's funny. Now you do realize you are truly a geologist at heart, because they all buy Subarus at one point. I don't know what it is, but the Subaru appeals to engineers and geologists. So
It was a great car. It was fantastic,
Yeah.
especially when I was in upstate New York and the
That's
all-wheel
funny.
drive. And then
Yeah.
but it kind of stranded me it had tension or pulley issue. I got stranded in the Texas Panhandle at 11:30 at night with no cell signal. And there were like coyotes howling. I said, nah, I'm going to give this to my daughter-in-law. I fixed it first.
Sure you did. Sure you did.
No, I
That's a
really-
good story. And now she's probably stuck somewhere thinking, oh, my mother-in-law, of course she would give me this thing.
She loves it. She's filled it with dogs.
Okay.
That's
Well,
funny.
Subarus, I feel like that's also something that's necessary,
No.
is that they have animals in them. And I think from our trip to Colorado, I think it's the state car of Colorado. I'm not sure, but I definitely felt out of place in our Camry because everywhere you turn, there was another Subaru.
Interesting. Yeah, that's they're
Okay, so
popular
what is my
among.
style of buying? Oh, sorry, I didn't need to jump in there, but
No.
what would you say my style of buying is then? What's wrong with me?
No, it seems to be pretty data driven. Kind of not as concerned about some of the feeling side of it, and really trying to get yourself the best either deal or best car or best something, whatever that something is for you. Going in with a lot of information about what you want, how much you want to pay, versus going in and go, I want a new car. I don't really know what. Kind of want to look around a little bit. And so when you do that, then that's a whole different experience, and you're at the dealership for hours and hours because they want to show you everything.
Oh, I can't handle that. I'd rather do all the research on my own time. But here's my heart of heart secret. It's all about conflict avoidance.
Sure.
Because I don't want to have to tell them, no, I don't want this. I want to go in knowing exactly what I want, and then I don't want to have to say haggle a bit, and I'm okay with them getting a little bit of money and profit. I mean,
Sure.
and I got extra warranty stuff, so I let them gouge me a bit, but I knew that they were gouging me, and I was cheerfully gouged. And it was for gouging that I thought was good.
So it wasn't that you went in wanting the best, it's you went in not wanting to say no.
It's true.
And Susan,
Okay.
I think you need to watch the movie The Life of Brian. It was a Monty Python movie. Because at the beginning he goes to the bazaar, and he goes, "How much is that?" And they go, 900 drachmas. "I'll take it." No, we must negotiate. Oh, 800 drachmas. Now you insult me. Lower. 400 drachmas. What, do you take me for a fool? Higher. So we need to train you that way. So when you go to the car dealership, just make them an outrageous offer and see what they do.
Yeah. Let me know how that turns out.
It might work out
I'll
okay.
50,000 for
This coming from the guy who bought 2 cars at one time.
Oh yeah, don't
and
use me
didn't
as an
even mean
example.
to.
Yeah, that was not brilliant.
Oh, that's funny though.
But we didn't negotiate. We just took it.
Yeah.
So purely emotional decision.
Sure thing.
Well, I love my decision, and I also love going to the Honda place because I love getting it serviced and hanging out at the car dealership. It sounds really weird too, but they have this great little cafe, and they make food to order, and then they have free Wi-Fi's, and then it's free coffee and some snack items. And you pay for some of the food, but some of it you don't. So I always feel a little bloated when I leave, but I'm so happy.
Well, that's terrific. I don't even know what to say. That's awesome. That you have such a good time at the car dealership. You should be a paid spokesman for them, because I bet for every one of you there are several that would say otherwise.
So now
So what
that
do
we
you say
know.
whenever they want to change things that are questionably necessary?
Now that we know how Susan buys a car, how did you come up with the standard of communication? In other words, the way to identify the different things.
Sure. So I didn't create the behavioral assessment. It was created in the 1980s as kind of a natural next step, maybe to a Myers-Briggs. So asking if we can identify traits in people, meaning things you would find on a Myers, can we then predict with a good level of reliability, how this person will act or how they'll behave. And so I get to work with kind of the most recent version of that assessment. And so someone will take it. There's 84 questions that are asked. Okay. About 42 really ask from a positive and a negative vantage point. So from that, the system, the analytic, presents a graph showing their 4 scales. There's cognitive, relational, goal, and detail. Mm-hmm. So the cognitive being how you communicate or store information. The upper value is that one I was mentioning earlier, is very abstract. The lower value is concrete. Leads into the relational. The upper value is insulated. The lower value the upper value is empathetic. The lower value is insulated. Then you get into goal. The upper value is very assertive. The lower value is accommodating. Mm-hmm. And then to detail, where the upper value of the assessment is detail, order, structure. The lower value is what we call focus. So when I have someone's results, I can meet with them or maybe their manager and say, this is how this person fits. This is how their perspective is necessary for this team, but you're going to have to make sure you ask it, because they're not going to be ones to always volunteer the way they feel about new ideas, that kind of thing.
Okay. Now, how do the people react to the test, if you will, and have you noticed improvements in their communication skills, the ability to relate to other people? What have you seen?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And one of the best parts that come out of it is self-awareness, understanding how you project onto others, because that's what the SOI is measuring. Mm-hmm. We've seen a lot of managers who had kind of a reputation for being, I don't want to say more aggressive, but just kind of unfeeling, perhaps, take it, and then meeting with people who report to them and just say, when they send that email that doesn't have "Good afternoon, I hope you're having a fantastic week," that they're not being rude. They just have a question and they're just asking a question. Right. In fact, he was a geologist, had a low relational score, and when I was working with him on the geology training plan, it's been a couple of years ago, he had sent me an email that said, "What's the status of this?" Well, later we had a meeting scheduled for later that week, but I just got an email from a senior vice president asking what's the status of this project, thinking, oh, okay, well, I got SVP is ticked off at me now. I went and grabbed all of my materials related to the geology training plan and ran upstairs expecting to, fire and brimstone and just flames coming out of his mouth is the way I interpreted his email. And he was in a great mood. He had forgot that we had a meeting scheduled later in the week, and then we had a little visit. So learning through those little things that people, we're different, and the way we communicate is going to be different, whether it's in person or, using email, text, that kind of thing.
Okay. That's really interesting, because it is difficult with certain types to, if you look at the average, let's say, engineer, programmers, scientists to a certain point, they all kind of fit in that Asperger's scale of slightly mildly autistic. Not all, but a lot of them do. Highly functional. That's very common. Communication skills are usually not that great. And the ones who do have good communication skills wind up in more of a project leadership or management role, because they can bridge that gap between the technical and the human. Have you found that to be?
I don't really think about how to quite respond. People who tend to communicate more openly and more often, I feel like are the ones who would make some of those moves. And so some of the lower cognitive, lower relational engineers, and the accountants to a degree, not that they aren't capable, but they just aren't as, they don't make themselves as visible.
Right.
Might be a way to say it. And so not that they wouldn't make good leaders, but they just aren't out there. They're busy doing their work.
Right. They may not want to be leaders per se, because a lot of technical people don't really want to go into leadership roles. They enjoy the technical part of it.
Right. And leading a group of people is not what they want to do, for sure.
And I remember when I was a VP of IT, I made the mistake on one, maybe more than one occasion, of promoting people who really didn't want to be promoted.
Sure.
And you learn really quickly, okay, that person has the skill set to be promoted, to take on more responsibilities, but they absolutely abhor that position.
Right.
Well, that makes sense. Totally from a Myers-Briggs,
Yeah.
thinking about how you're updating that. Well, I always think of people who are extroverted as people who need that energy flow from other people in order to feel comfortable and sort of whole as a person.
Yeah.
Whereas others who are more in the I version, the introverted, all that means is that they need the recharge with thoughts and ideas and calm. And so that idea of working at their computer, getting all that, organizing the world or letting their thoughts flow, that's recharging to them, and they need that. So if you get them out there and drain them all the time, whereas the extroverts get it, loving it, the introverts is going, oh my gosh, I can't handle this. Not one more reading.
Well, yeah, and look at salespeople. They're competitive. They're more aggressive. They're competitive. They enjoy that. They like that almost contact sport idea. Whereas you don't find too many introverts in sales. It's rare. Even in technical sales, they tend to be a little more extroverted because of the nature of what they're doing. Because the introverted person is probably not going to ask for the sale the same way, if they ask for it at all. So it's interesting. But so I do think those tools are great, especially when you're in corporations where you have such a diverse set of people,
Right.
to get them to just understand just a little bit better what each one is like. Now, in this show, we found out that both Susan and I are real idiots when it comes to buying cars.
Now, okay, Rick, I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have two identical dogs, and do they have different names?
No, but we have two dogs right now that are similar, very similar, and they do have
I'm not
different names. They do
surprised.
have different names.
The same name, that could get confusing real fast.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, because they hear, well, actually, it doesn't matter. When you have two dogs, no matter who you call, they both show up in case food's around.
Okay, right.
So it really doesn't matter. Cats don't care. They're different. But dogs, anybody you call, it's like, Rosie, boom, they're both there. I called Rosie, doesn't matter. Daisy's there. And of course,
There might
both
be
their
food,
names
so I'm
end
gonna
with
be here.
EY, so that we're actually with Y, so they figure Rosie, Daisy. Oh, E. He called E, so the E shows up. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, so Chris, do you have any dogs?
We do. We have one dog. His name is Carney. I found him at the Oklahoma State Fair in 2008, so that's where he got his name. So he was this. You could emaciated. You could see his ribs, but his belly was real big, and so he came over, and people were kicking at him and stuff. We were trying to beg for food, and he looked up at me, and I looked down at him, and he looked at me, and I looked back down at him and said, "All right, you're coming with me," and I took him to Morgan, which was my girlfriend at the time. I took him to her apartment and said, "Look what I won! It's an emaciated dog," and she wasn't too keen on the idea then, but he's really turned out to be probably the best dog we've ever had. So he's good. And William, our 16-month-old son, is learning to say no to the dog a lot. So we try to redirect William from stuff, but it's hard to not say no to the dog. Like, no, go.
Yep.
So
That's funny.
he's learning real quick.
So is he still emaciated, and what kind of dog is he?
No. He is in great shape now. The way he eats, you would still think that he hasn't had 2 meals a day for the last 7 years, but he has, in fact. And then what was the other part of your question?
Oh, so what kind of dog is he?
Mostly mutt. There's some lab there. People tell us all sorts of things. That we can go to the dog park and 5 different people will say, 5 different things they think he is. And they'll, sometimes say like, fancy French names. And I go, yeah, I found my dog.
Yep. He's a pedigree mutt. Just
good.
say pedigree mutt.
Pedigree mutt. I like it. Yep. He's good. He will fetch until he had no life in him anymore.
Oh, he's a lab
that's
then.
fun.
That makes him a lab.
So I think he's probably mostly lab for sure, but we just get all sorts of different responses, so it's kind of fun.
Yep. Well, we are at the end of our time, and Chris, it's been a pleasure meeting you and sharing. I know you guys know each other, but this was fun and
It was.
and even informative. And now you know never to sell us a car, so that's definitely a good thing. But
now I know I can gouge Susan and get you to buy 2 at one time.
That's right. No, all you have to do is tell Susan it costs this much, and no, Rick, you can't drive her car first.
Right, yeah. That's it.
And it's over.
That's
At
it.
that point, it's over.
I like it. That's good stuff. Thank you so much for having me on. It was a real pleasure.
Same here. And for all you people watching, please subscribe. Give us a thumbs up if you like the show. And we will see you next week on Life Edge. Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. You were great.
Good. Well, thanks so much. That was fun. I hope everything